Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and it's not Spawn year. It is day 75 of my comic review video day calendar, and it's in another exciting landmark number, 75. Not as big of a deal as 50 or 100, but I just had this thought. 75 made a huge deal out of that anniversary for Batman, and we've already been past the 80th now. Why is everything I love getting so old? What is happening with time? And how am I already 75 days into not Spawn year, but I've already gotten a day behind? Don't worry, I'll catch up. I know it's only ostensibly day 75, but anyway, it's, I guess, kind of fitting for a pseudo landmark number that I'm tackling something this great. And I picked this one somewhat at random. I'm trying to pick a different title again every day for Batman, and I was like, well, I gotta do something for Legends of the Dark Knight. I've always liked the early arcs of this series that I've read. I have talked about Shaman before, not too long ago. Austin and I reviewed that. It's spectacular, by the way. That's the first arc of this book, and this is, by the way, if you're not familiar, an anthology book that begins in 1989, touted itself up, made a big deal out of being the first solo Batman book since 1941 or whatever it was, 1939, and maybe it was 41. And anyway, it had a number of kind of major, now beloved, really well-regarded early Batman stories. And eventually it stopped being that premise, but it begins with a lot of things that are in the same tone as Batman Year One. And it feels like sort of Batman Year One, the series, like continuing on from there, both tonally and continuity-wise. It has a really good sense of continuity, even though you might expect that each of these stories was real standalone and kind of didn't matter, whether they counted, whether they were canonical, but it really remembers everything, and it informs a lot of things that happen chronologically after it. And this stuff is kind of must-read Batman material. So anyway, I've talked about Shaman. I have read, if not also reviewed, Gothic. It's been a long time. Venom, I have reviewed. That's the introduction to the Bane Venom toxin, but not Bane himself. Bruce, if you're not familiar, Batman gets on it first before we meet Bane. And that's also a Denny O'Neil thing, I believe. But I had never read the one in between Gotham and Venom, and that is Prey. So this is Legends of the Dark Knight number 11. Look at this wonderful kind of Gothic cover. I love the kind of blood red. Just Batman in red goes together so well, and ever since The Batman, I can't help but think that it's kind of crazy we didn't do more stuff with Red Batman before, but now I'm also starting to notice it whenever it pops up, and here it is. This comes out in 1991, and this is written by the great Doug Moench, who has, of course, a long history with Batman, a long tenure with this character, and I tend to really like his writing, and this is some of the best Moench writing I think I've ever read, with art by Paul Gulacy, who has also a lot of Batman credits, and after looking at this, might be one of my favorite Batman artists retroactively. Like, I didn't realize how much I loved this guy, and I'm sure I've seen his stuff before, but I feel like he is cribbing a little bit, intentionally or otherwise. Maybe it's just subconscious. I'm not sure, but there's a lot of Dave Gibbons in the art here. This really strikes me as Batman a la Watchmen. It's not all the 9-panel grid, but I mean, right away, particularly with the way it's colored and with the kind of pseudo-realistic faces, like they're very I almost said expressionistic. They're very expressive, but they are also somewhat exaggerated, but there's a realism to his faces, and really highly detailed all over the place. Like, just look at, I know this is a kind of a random detail to point out, but just as an example, like, look at all of the lines in the bottom of the man's shoe at the bottom of this page. Like, just meticulous attention to detail through this. Really cinematic, really feels like you're looking at storyboards for a movie and or you know a movie itself. I said the same thing on the last show about the Neil Adams Brave the Bold book with Green Arrow 85 that I reviewed, and this is just as cinematic or more so as that, and kind of a treat doing these two things back to back because artistically they're both brilliant. That was a fun book for what it was. This is just top-notch crime drama and really sinks its teeth into the psychology of Batman and why he does what he does, and has himself a little bit conflicted and trying to decide just how out to lunch he might be and whether his purpose is too self-serving or not. And I'll get into all of that. This is kind of the best of both worlds, the perfect fusion of just a nice, gritty Batman detective story and also a story where at least the personal stakes for Batman are very high and it feels important, it feels kind of like an event, and it is dissecting the character a little bit, but it doesn't feel like deconstruction so much as construction in the first place, in my opinion, I think. I can see a case being made for deconstruction where you take, and I feel like that's a word we throw around too much, and we get bogged down in what things are doing that and not. I guess compared to stories told pre-Miller, this absolutely is deconstruction, but if you're looking at it at least chronologically, as in an early Batman story, obviously it's informed by a lot of things that would happen after it in the timeline. But if you think about it as a story of Batman's early years, it makes a lot of sense that he would be kind of shooting at the hip, doing what comes naturally, fulfilling his obsession, and then when he's called out publicly, when somebody like Hugo Strange goes on television and suggests that maybe he's a psychotic person, maybe he's obsessed with power, maybe he needs the limelight even though he's wearing a mask, it would give a person pause. It would make you stop for a little bit and go, obviously what I'm doing is unusual. Obviously I'm an extreme personality. I made this vow. I have to fulfill it. I'm compelled. Kind of like Rorschach says in Watchmen, we do it because we're compelled. I just can't help myself. But what does it say about me? Like, am I actually here for the right reasons? And I think what Mensch is really exploring here is why crime fighting, both for a vigilante and for cops. What is the real purpose of trying to maintain law and order on a personal level, on an individual level? So we have kind of a parallel here with Batman and a police officer who is maybe here for the wrong reasons. And there's a lot of really good, subtle, nuanced dialogue about this, where, for instance, he and Gordon are talking, and he is complaining. I'm forgetting for a second the name of this guy. It starts with a C. What is it? Sergeant Colt. So Colt. And by the way, let me just back up for a second and say, I was so enthralled with just this issue that I feel like unless it just really drops the ball somewhere, it will be such a treat to get 5 whole issues of this. This is real dense. There's so much going on in just this one issue. It reads spectacularly well by itself. It's got a great cliffhanger, so obviously you want to keep going, but that is a lot of bang for your buck if you're buying that when it first comes out in 1991 money. What was this, $1.50? I just can't imagine like leaving a comic store and looking at this, and obviously you'd be chomping at the bit, or I would be anyway, chomping at the bit for more. But this is a good 20-25 minute read. At least it was for me. And it's, like I said, it's dense. It's pretty talky, but it's certainly not overwritten. And even the internal monologue, some of which is, or I should say narration boxes, some of which is actually internal monologue, like with Gordon, and some of which is like writing in a journal with Batman. if you love the Batman, read this. The movie, read this, because this is the kind of stuff that movie is absolutely looking at. I don't know if it's looking at this specifically, this cover notwithstanding. It's hard to imagine that it isn't, but certainly these kinds of stories and from this period, that movie is very in touch with. But anyway, you've got this great exchange at the beginning here, right after we've had a scene where Colt has been working undercover, trying to expose a gang on the streets, and Batman shows up and kind of does his job for him, and Colt gets pissed off and feels like Batman is making the police look bad, and he's, like I said, doing their job for them. And he says to Gordon, and this really reveals his character and his his motivation. And I should say, like, his strength of character or lack thereof. He says to Gordon, real cops shouldn't have that pride stripped away. Like, we come right out, and not in an in-your-face way. I like it when we're this articulate and explicit about character motivation in fiction. What does your protagonist, what does your antagonist want? That is the kind of thing that is totally fine to come right out and spell, because these are things that people do tend to talk about, and I think it is really useful to kind of tell a reader, you know, where you stand with a character like this. Some things you don't want to be that explicit about. I think character motivation, just me personally, I do appreciate this kind of, you know, getting it right out in the open. And anyway, he says, so pride is what this guy is all about. And yeah, I'm getting bogged down now. Yes, you can be more subtle about it too. That's another approach, but I think this is very effective. He says, real cops shouldn't have that pride stripped away and have their noses rubbed in it by some vigilante, italics, vigilante, who's twice the criminal as the scum he's stealing from us. And Gordon's response is, stealing from us? And then he says, you know what I mean, Captain? Because Gordon is a captain now, not the commissioner yet. And he says, actually, I don't, Sergeant Colt. So this guy's motivations are being called into question. And I love that he's not on the take. He's not and this is still a very corrupt Gotham. This is not a corrupt cop. This is a very clean, above-board cop. He does everything by the book, pretty much. I get the feeling that at some point he's going to become a loose cannon, maybe. But right now, he does everything right, but is he doing it for the right reasons? And so putting him up against Batman, like, why does he hate Batman? This guy doesn't like vigilantes, not because he doesn't believe that people should take the law into their own hands, but because he wants the fame and the glory, because it's all about his pride as a police officer. He needs to get accolades for what he's doing. He needs to be able to pat himself on the back for just doing his job. And of course, Batman is not like that, but Batman's got his own hang-ups and his own set of problems. So Hugo Strange goes on TV, and Gordon is part of this panel, and Gordon doesn't understand why he's there. He's real crotchety through this whole issue, and the man is just trying to do his job. He thinks that Batman is helping him do that job, of course. Batman saved him and his wife. Again, really good sense of continuity, and he says that Batman takes the place of 50 police officers. So whether he is above the law or not, Gordon is on his side because he is effective, but also his heart seems to be in the right place, in a way that somebody like Colt, even though he's not a corrupt cop, is not. And so Hugo Strange starts psychoanalyzing Batman. And as I said before, he starts saying, like, I'm fascinated by his obsession. And Hugo Strange, classically, of course, and this is, I think, supposed to be, post-crisis, the second appearance of Strange. And I think the idea is, like, Batman's dealt with him before, maybe. I read this on Wiki. It's not in the book, but I think the idea is supposed to be that his first appearance is actually is actually depicted later in something else. So we haven't seen that yet. Take that with a grain of salt. I just read that in a wiki article, but apparently this is not his first appearance, but it certainly reads that way. And he comes out and he says, Batman, I'm fascinated by Batman because he has this obsession with the night and with dressing up as a creature of the night. And he starts piecing together Batman's backstory, and some of it he gets right and some of it he doesn't. Between this TV interview and him just kind of talking to himself toward the end, in front of what I think is supposed to be a prostitute, I'm not sure, he says, this man must have had a trauma in his past that leads him to like someone close to him was mugged or killed, probably killed, and it probably just didn't just happen to him. It probably wasn't like he was mugged on the street. Something horrible happened to someone he cares about. He gets that right. Strange is pretty sure that it's his wife that dies, and he must think that it happened when he was not when he was a kid. And I suspect, and so he's wrong about that, of course, and I suspect that that's probably because of, I just had this thought, something that Gordon says earlier, that it shouldn't be possible. Like, part of the reason he wants to work with Batman also is because nobody can do what Batman does. He doesn't understand how someone in just 5 years' time has become as capable as Batman has and has had the kind of training he has. It would take your whole life. And my assumption is that Strange is thinking, this isn't really in the book, but this is my best guess, that Strange is thinking, it's got to be a wife. It's got to have happened not too long ago, and he already has a background in maybe the military or as a police officer or whatever it is. And of course, he would be incorrect about that because Batman is even more extraordinary in his ability and in his sheer power of will than Strange even realizes. And so Batman is... By the way, Bruce Wayne is working on his Batmobile, and I think the idea is supposed to be that he hasn't had one yet. I couldn't tell at first if he was fixing it or if he was getting it going in the first place, but he says to Alfred that he's got to concentrate on this and try to make a car that is faster and more capable than anything he could just go out and buy. And so I think we're witnessing the origin of the Batmobile here, which is kind of fun. I don't know that I've actually really seen that in anything. And so we're doing a lot of setup here, of course, because this is the beginning of this 5-issue arc. And so we've got Colt being set up to run a task force to catch Batman. So the whole reason, it turns out, it was a secret that Gordon had to go on television. He was like, why am I here? Nobody's even letting me speak. All this psychobabble, and he even says that out loud on air. The psychobabble is stupid. Batman obviously is not a real creature of the night like Hugo Strange is saying. It's not this incredibly complex psychology. It's just that he wants to scare criminals. And Gordon is portrayed as kind of a simple thinking guy. Not simple-minded, but he just doesn't overthink things. And that's really refreshing. At the same time, I meant to mention this earlier, the idea is, I think, that I'm looking for a particular panel here. Here it is. The idea, I think, is supposed to be that Gordon is... I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Pardon me, I've got it now. So the idea is supposed to be that Hugo Strange is actually maybe a little bit onto something, and that's where the conflicted nature of Bruce Wayne comes in, where there's a grain of truth to some of this, where he is kind of extreme. He does work by himself. He could have just gone and become a cop, but he needs to do it alone. Why? There's sort of this mystery now for Bruce Wayne about himself, where he hasn't completely put together his own MO. And I think what really cuts to the quick for him, and is the reason I love the visual storytelling here, is the reason that he kind of, Hugo Strange strikes a nerve. The reason that he squeezes a glass too hard and breaks it and cuts himself and starts bleeding is because he is because Hugo Strange says that Batman is obsessed with power. He has to control everything. Why else would he be working by himself and going over the police and making the police look bad? Which the talk show host makes the case for, and very quickly Gordon tries to refute that, but there is a grain of truth to that also, and that's one of the constants in a lot of Batman stories, is that the police are either incompetent, or they look incompetent, or they're so corrupt that there's not enough good ones. That's kind of the Batman Begins way of, and here too, that you actually really do need Batman on the streets of Gotham, because otherwise you just have a lot of cops that are out for themselves and nobody else. Even the one of the best cops in the city that's really above board isn't doing it for the right reasons and is just there for himself. And so there is some truth to that, but there's also maybe some truth to Batman being a little power mad. And ultimately, the idea with Hugo Strange is he has kind of a monologue about this at the end. Again, he's just kind of talking to himself. Hugo Strange is talking about how we do the classic, like, there's the prostitute, what I think is supposed to be a prostitute, because he's just talking to himself, but there's this woman sitting there wearing, scantily clad, wearing lingerie, and she never says anything. There's no setup for that. So I have to assume that Hugo Strange just, hired a woman there, and it's the classic, like, Hugo Strange wishing he could be Batman and being kind of I've always seen this character as like a psychotic Batman fan who knows that he doesn't have what it takes to be Batman and doesn't even think like him or understand him, but wishes he could be him. And so he has a speech at the end when he puts on his makeshift Batman suit. I always love it when Hugo Strange does this. He does it in Englehart, and he does it here, and he makes his own bat suit, and he's talking about, like, the power that it gives him, and like how powerful he feels wearing it. And he is jealous of Batman and hates Batman because he has the audacity to do this when Hugo Strange would never have thought to do it himself. And so he's obsessed with him because he loves Batman's obsession. And that whole thing is really interesting and kind of twisted, and I'm excited to look at more of this. I can't believe we get to this so quickly. You'd think that this would be, like, if this is being plotted now in a 5-issue arc, this is your, like, second act plot point, or it happens like at the end of issue 3 or something. I couldn't believe we got there that quickly. The dramatic situation is very classic and very compelling, where, and I tried to get to this earlier, pardon me, where Gordon, being on television, finds out along with the rest of the world that his commissioner has decided that he has to head up the task force to catch Batman. And of course, he believes in Batman, even though he has to pretend publicly like he doesn't, and doesn't want to do that. So he, but he has to. So he hires Colt, or he assigns, I should say, Colt to be the head of that task force, because he's not on the take or anything, but he thinks that he is kind of dumb enough that maybe he, or stupid enough that he can maybe control him. And that's, I'm sure, going to turn out to be a massive mistake, given that he's, like, that's the one thing that I kind of question with this is, if you're Gordon and you don't actually want to go after Batman, but you're forced to kind of phone that in, wouldn't you not want to go with the guy who most wants that job and most hates Batman and is going to do everything he can to bring him down because he doesn't like the reputation that Batman is giving him? I just kind of wonder about that. And Colt ends up doing kind of stupid thing at the end of this where he pulls together his members of the task force, because Gordon basically has him headed up. So he says, you pick 10 guys, and Colt doesn't just pick 10 guys, he takes them on a training exercise that accidentally leads them to a firefight with mobsters. And Batman is there, and so they end up going up against Batman the first time night out when they weren't even supposed to be looking for Batman yet. And Batman's like, this guy's really stupid. And there's this weird distinction he makes where he says, Colt's really stupid, but he's not dumb. And I'm like, oh, okay, I guess those are different things. Also, Catwoman is here. I don't know why yet. And she also has this really poetic internal monologue. I'm not sure what that's up about yet. But I like that she's got her kind of 90s purple suit already. And I guess I'll find out when I read more of this what she's doing here. But I love looking at this so much, and the writing and the art are very much up to snuff with each other. This is one of the best issues of Batman I think I've ever read. I loved this, and I can't wait to look at the rest of it. One of the best things about Legends of the Dark Knight is that it feels like it matters, and continuity is not as important as the story itself being great, of course, but what puts this over the top is that it feels quintessential. It feels important. It feels necessary to this character, and I love how vulnerable Bruce gets in front of Alfred, and how unsure he is of himself, almost like he's gone, almost as if he went to the psychiatrist, like if he went to Hugo Strange and actually bought some of what he was selling, and it starts making him doubt himself, and not to a whiny degree, not to a place where I'm not sympathetic to Batman, but it strikes a nerve, and it reads like it's the first time it does, where it's the first time he's really questioning whether whether he should be doing what he's doing, or at least if he's there for the right reasons. Like if he actually is a little bit more like Colt, or a little bit more like Hugo Strange, where it's really self-serving, and it's not as much about actually creating real change or helping kids on the street from, getting or having their parents murdered in front of them. Wherever you gotta go to get this or read it in digital, find this and read it. It's fantastic, and I don't know if the rest of it holds up, but I would be surprised if it didn't, given the quality of the rest of the early arcs that I've read so far with Legends of the Dark Knight. Guys, thanks a lot for watching. Sure appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed today's review, and I'll be back again soon with another one. I'm Captain Logan, and happy reading.